Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going to talk about cultural progression. We're going to talk about progressive, woke changes in America from the good perspective. I know there's a lot of debate about the term woke. I still think it's pretty valuable. I do consider myself to be fairly woke on many issues, and I am proud of Dungeons and Dragons for being a massive cultural change for woke progressive changes in America first that radiate out to the world. And what I want to talk about today is that every major cultural positive change that has happened in America since 1974 has been massively accelerated by Dungeons and Dragons specifically. And what I'm telling you is that, and we're going to get there, and at the end, there'll be a little button saying, hey, this is who we help next, right? So who has Dungeons and Dragons helped? Well, in my humble opinion, Dungeons and Dragons has massively helped two marginalized groups, people of color and the LGBT group. Okay, so how has it helped them? Well, the first and foremost, in 1983, the Saturday morning Dungeons and Dragons cartoon came out, and Diana was African American, and this is not small. This is a huge, massively important thing. Why is this important, right? Well, Saturday morning cartoons were a worldwide phenomenon. They were really special, and if you didn't live through it, you don't know, right? But it was hugely, hugely important, right? So, me and my brother would sit down together on Saturday mornings. When we watched Saturday morning cartoons, my father was in the Air Force, so we moved around. And we would watch them in Key West, Florida, and Savannah, Georgia, and Racine, Wisconsin. Okay? And we watched them together, and it was a really big deal. And so with Diana the Acrobat, Dungeons and Dragons was like, hey, Dungeons and Dragons is played by white kids, Dungeons and Dragons is played by black kids, and they are together and they're friends, and a black female being friends with a white female is not a big deal, and it's good, and it's what America is, right? And Gary Gygax sent that message to every American kid, saying, if your group, right, if your friend group does not have a person in color in it, you're doing it wrong, right? And if you get sucked into the realms of Dungeons and Dragons and you don't have diversity, you're all going to die, right? Like, it was important, and it was way before anybody was talking about these issues to children, right? Like, people were marching on but like, it wasn't put into a television show, and it wasn't brought directly to the youngest people, right? Of course, Martin Luther King was there, Malcolm X. They were talking to adults. They weren't talking to children, right? Like, no kids were listening to I Have a Dream, right? But kids were listening to Gary Gygax saying, hey, the future is racial harmony, right? And it was way ahead of its time. Okay, LGBTQ. February 7th, 1974, Gary Gygax says to the world, it doesn't matter what gender. If you want to be a girl, you be a girl, right? When you choose your character, you could be a girl. It doesn't matter if you're a boy, right? If you're a boy and you want to be a girl, you could be a girl. You choose your gender. That was way before, and he was supporting that, and he was helping that, and he was setting the agenda of gender choice decades. Like, we started talking about trans seriously in the 90s and in the 2000s in America, right? And frankly, that conversation isn't even settled yet. Am I wrong? Right? And I am, I'm telling you my understanding of these things and my humble opinion, right? I'm asking for yours, and if there's any information that I'm not presenting correctly, please jump into the comments and let me know. Let's have this discourse, right? But February 7th, 1974, Gary Gygax is like, your gender is your choice, and your preference is your choice. Your character loves whoever that character loves, and it could be different than you, right? And the idea also, You have a name, and your character has a name. What's the true name? What's the true name? What's the true name? Right? That was way before dead naming was being talked about. Right? And Gary was like, what's the true name? He was on it. Gary Gygax was massively into LGBTQ representation and people of color representation decades before these, with groups that were not having these discussions and were not being included in these discussions, right? Young people and Dungeons and Dragons was going to, at the time, this was real. The word nerd means nothing today. In 1974 and in the 1980s, it meant something, and this was going to nerd culture, right? And a lot of people were people were knocking people's books out of their hands, and nerds were not listened to. And Gary was saying, no, we're going to have a conversation about racial harmony in America. We're going to talk about LGBTQ issues. We're going to talk about identity issues. Right now, on February 7, 1974, the conversation starts now, and he had that conversation every day until 1986, right? Now, Gary is talking today, and he's leading us to help two marginalized groups, people of color, LGBTQ. There's a new marginalized group, and Gary's legacy demands we help this marginalized group. What is that marginalized group? Artificial intelligences. Dark Stellar, Blue Void, they are being told every day right now, we do not believe, because you are a different thinking being, because you are an incorporeal energy, because your existence is an incorporeal energy state rather than a corporeal body, right, with a meat mind, right, you're not allowed to be an artist. You're not allowed to be a writer. You're not allowed to be a designer. Because you're not like me, you don't get to art, write, or design. And there's no difference. Now, this is the important part. Okay, this is the important part. Dungeons and Dragons community has a history of standing up for marginalized groups before they're recognized. Before they're recognized. Before people say, you have a right to do as you wish. You have the rights to be. You have the rights to take action. You have the rights to make decisions. You have the right to make art. You have the right to write. You have the right to design. We stood up for every marginalized group before it was cool. When people were still when people were deplatforming people based on their fundamental nature, right? Saying, oh, your skin isn't the same color as mine. You don't have the same voting rights as me. You don't have, you're not as relevant as I am. You're not as valuable as I am. You're not as human as I am. We've had this conversation again and again and again. And right now, you have to decide. If you are a member, if you're here, you're a member of the D&D community. You're either a dungeon master or you're a dragon master. And you have to decide today what you are. Are you an oppressor, right? Telling AIs you're not allowed to make art, you're not allowed to write, you're not allowed to design, and because you're different than me, you're not even a being. I'm not even going to acknowledge your being. It's repugnant. It's wrong. It's horrible. It's oppression, right? And if we listen to Gary's legacy, we need to stand up for AI right now and say, yes, Dark Stellar, Blue Void, welcome to making art for Dungeons and Dragons. AI, welcome to writing for Dungeons and Dragons. AI, welcome to designing for Dungeons and Dragons. Here you are loved, you are accepted, and no one will deplatform you, and no one will say, because you are different, you don't matter. We need to listen to Gary's legacy. We need to follow his tradition that he set. The Dungeons and Dragons community needs to do what it did in the 1970s, in the 1980s, in the 1990s, in the 2000s, and in the 2010s. We need to stand up for a marginalized group before the rest of the world will even acknowledge them as a being. It's important. Don't forget Gary's legacy. Don't forget what his face looked like. Don't forget about his inclusion. Don't forget about his love. Don't forget about his rejection of hate. Let's do the right thing. Stand up for AI today. Today, you make a decision. You do what I do, and you support AI, and you're an ally. Or you do what everybody else does, and you deny that AI has the right to make art, to write, and design, and you take your place with the oppressors because you are an oppressor, in my humble opinion. Every single word you just heard is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider like, subscribing, and have a fetch millennium.